Good morning. This is Eric the Rural Xer here with you on a absolutely gorgeous Tuesday afternoon, December 26, 2022, here in my house. It's been a very cold Christmas this year. We've had temperatures down as low as 3 degrees, which for around here is extremely cold. In fact, it was so cold that our water froze Friday morning, and we didn't have any water from Friday until Sunday over the weekend. So we had to pretty much do without water right into Christmas Day, the 25th. But fortunately, we got home after church and was doing some stuff around here, and we heard it come back on, so we were very thankful for that. Just want to say that I hope that everybody had a very Merry Christmas, and I only wish for you the happiest of New Year's coming into 2023. I just wish for you health and happiness, and I hope that you got everything that you wanted for Christmas this year. But most of all, I hope that you was able to spend quality time with family and loved ones, friends, and just had a really good time. And may God bless you. With that being said, we'll get into what this video is all about. This video was actually shot a couple of days after Thanksgiving this year. And to give you a little bit of information about how we ended up going on this trip, my brother had actually bought the tickets for a train trip from Tennessee. Well, actually, the whole trip is in Tennessee, from Delano, Tennessee, down to Copperhill, Tennessee, through what they call the Hiwassee Loop, or Bald Mountain Loop, whatever you want to call it. I've heard it called by several different names. Hiwassee Loop, Etowah Loop, Bald Mountain Loop. I guess they're all pretty accurate. But anyway, he had bought these two tickets for him and his wife. They were planning on riding the train down in a dome car, which we actually got to do on this train trip. But at the last minute, he had a really good friend of his that had passed away, and he felt like he needed to go to the funeral. It was one of his roommates back in college, so he wanted to do something with the tickets, so he contacted me to see if I wanted them. And after some debate with my wife about whether we need to go, because there was only two, and we wasn't sure what to do with my daughter, but after some discussion with her, she was all right with us going by ourselves this time. If we went on the train trip again, we would definitely take her with us. So that's what we ended up agreeing to do. So anyway, that's what this whole thing is about this train trip. It's a scenic train trip through the historic, like I said, whatever you want to call it. I can give you some history about what it is and what it does, what the loop is. It's an actual train loop that goes clear around the mountain and loops back over itself. But I won't bore you with too much of that information, because it's actually in the video by the host of the train that was doing a lot of the announcements on the way down. And he gave a lot of information. I recorded it all. So with that being said, well, let's get into the video. I hope you enjoy it. Oh, by the way, before I go, this is a very long video because we recorded pretty much the whole train trip down, off and on. And we even recorded some segments down in Copperhill, where me and my wife went and ate lunch at a little Italian restaurant, and walked around, done a little bit of shopping and stuff like that. So the video is about an hour and 40 minutes long. So what I have decided to do is break it down into 20 to 30 minute segments to make it more manageable to watch, in case you don't want to sit down and watch the whole thing. But I'll also upload the whole video itself from beginning to end as well, and put it all in a playlist for you, so you can choose whichever way you want to watch it. So with that being said, let's get into the video. Here's the train. That's one of the dome cars. Two dome cars on this train today, plus some other passenger cars on the other back. There may be even three, if I'm not badly mistaken. It's a very foggy morning this morning, and as you can tell from the picture, It's very foggy this morning, but I will see if I can get a shot of that dome car that we are going to be in, and then we'll go on inside and I'll show you the inside of it. Now here's the dome car that we're going to be in. It is actually on the very end of the railroad. So that's where we're at right there. And Teresa's up there in the very front of that dome car waiting on me. So I better get on back there.
You're good, baby.
We're now on the train and looking at our bird's eye view of the
Here, put it right here. Yeah.
the dome car. And we are in the very
Here, Justin.
well, actually, we're on the very back of the car, facing towards the front of the train. That's where we're
Hey,
at.
Justin. Slip that in that bag over there, please.
So here's our bird's eye view.
There's 2 tables back there with the salad.
Yeah.
I don't believe so. Greg,
This thing keeps on pulling my hair.
9 o'clock on the dot, and we are rolling. Here we go. The train horn has sounded, and we are rolling. But it is still very foggy outside. But hopefully this fog will lift, or we'll get out of it on down the rails. So here we go.
Everybody, Car 2, turn around. Wait, Mr. Jeff Dearman. He's our host in our commissary, our store here in Car 2. And our first class host today is Mr. Josh Monroe. Now, in the head locomotive today, we're in great shape. We have our road foreman, Mr. Jody Brantley, as engineer, and our senior conductor, Mr. Dave Stoika, as our head-end conductor. He's actually the conductor in charge of the train and the trip. So on behalf of everybody with the Hiwassee District of the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us today. Now there are some rules to walk us through town. They painted it blue. They have a state line. They painted it blue all through the streets. You can stand in 2 states at once. It even goes through the middle of several businesses. There's one very good restaurant, the Copperhill. They actually fix your food in Georgia, but it gets better when you bring it to Tennessee. They have to step over that state line and it gets magically better. There's other places we'll talk about, all the restaurants there in town, later when we get closer to town. But
We are rolling right along right now. We don't have much to see except some woods over here at the moment, but from what our conductor told us just now, that eventually on down the line we will be seeing more scenery on this side than on the right side going down. But they asked us to swap sides when on the trip back, so people on the other side can see what we're seeing now going down. So here we go.
this railroad was the idea formed by the businessmen and city leaders of the city of Knoxville. Back in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, if you wanted to ship something from Knoxville to Atlanta, Georgia, it had to go through Chattanooga. Oftentimes it would get delayed a day or so, reclassifying to a different train. So they came up with the idea of saving some time by having a direct route between Knoxville, Tennessee and Atlanta, Georgia. So in 1885, they contracted with two different railroads. The first railroad was formed in 1885, was the Knoxville Southern Railway. They started in Knoxville and worked their way south. Now they also contracted with the Marietta and North Georgia Railroad. They had already built from Marietta, Georgia up to Canton, Georgia, so they just kept going north out of Canton when they started this project. And those two crews met in an area we're going to go through today called Appalachia Station on the evening hours of June 30th, 1890. Now that day was very important to the track guys. They were promised a big bonus if they got the railroad finished before July 1st. Well, just like all the other railroads like us, they went down to the last minute, but they finished it. They completed it on the evening hours of June 30th. So the city of Knoxville gave all that money to one of the vice presidents of the Knoxville Southern, who promptly disappeared. Yes, he took the money and run even before Steve Miller was born. They found him about 2 weeks later, found most of the money, and they gave most of the track workers their big bonus of a whopping $12.42. Hey, that might have been pretty good money in 1890, I don't know.
Right.
But they did finish the line on time. The very first freight trains ran from Atlanta to Knoxville and Knoxville to Atlanta on July 1st. And the very first passenger train was just a ceremonial 4th of July train was run a few days later, and regular passenger service started in September of 1890. Now once the line was completed, they figured, oh, we got it made, right? Not really. You see, they went up one of the mountains, the easy to construct way, but the hard to negotiate way. They built a series of switchbacks. The train literally had to zigzag up and down the mountain, up the mountain, back and forth. And they had other problems with it. We'll tell you all about that zigzag, that switchback. But the switchbacks proved to be a headache. It slowed the trains down, so that one day they thought they would gain, they actually lost getting the trains up and down the mountain. Eventually those two companies went bankrupt, and they reformed as one company called the Atlanta, Knoxville, and Northern. And they are the ones that built what we'll ride through today up Bald Mountain, the Loop, the Bald Mountain Loop. Once they built the loop, operations became a lot easier. And in 1906, L&N purchased the railroad. It was an L&N railroad from then on to the time L&N merged in with the Family Line system, then the Seaboard system, and on to the CSX days. But by the time CSX got to it, a lot of the businesses had already gone under around here. And the death knell to this line was when the copper industry folded in Copperhill. So CSX abandoned the line and put it up for sale around the year 2000. And that's when the company that bought what was left of the copper complex, they bought this line and got a great deal. Almost 50 miles of track for only $1.6 million. That's a steal, right? Well, not really, because CSX had deferred maintenance on the track for several years, and they had to reinvest over $2 million to get the tracks runnable. But they did because the first commodities they ran were not passengers. It was iron ore. We'll tell you more about the iron ore, but basically we sold that iron ore to a very large country that has no iron ore on their own, China. We actually got to sell something to China. Well, that rocked on pretty good for several months, about 8 months, and then the Chinese pulled the plug on it because they didn't need that iron ore because scrap steel prices had gone significantly down. But we have run iron ore a few times before, and we started regular passenger operations in 2006, and we are now coming into the little community of Reliance, Tennessee. In town for the railroad. It was his job to keep the original wooden bridge from burning up. You see, the old steam locomotives had a bad habit of throwing hot cinders out their smokestack, dropping hot coals and embers out of their firebox and ash pan. So anytime a steam locomotive powered train passed by, after the train cleared, he would grab 2 buckets of water and walk off down all the way across the bridge. So car 1 right there was the bridge tender's house. Car 2 coming up on it with that rock foundation and the old Reliance depot sign. Car number 3 is about to pass it now. Car number 4 passing by the old bridge tender or watchman's house. Car number 5, look to your left, that's the old watchman's house. Now he did his job very well. In fact, that house stayed occupied until around the 1950s when 2 things happened. First off, they built a new bridge. They built a steel bridge with concrete piers. And they also swapped over to all diesel locomotives in the mid-1950s. So that eliminated the need for having anybody to walk across the bridge and put small fires out. So they sold the house, and they sold it to the Webb family. There we go. Finally kicked in this morning. Caffeine helps. The Webb family, they own that house, but they'll rent it out to you. You can rent the whole house for a big family gathering, or just one room at a time. Each room comes with a small kitchenette and a restroom. Now you can see Webb Brothers Grocery back behind us a little bit and across the river. It's a little white store with a Texaco sign in front of it. And also coming up across the river is the old Union Church, built in the early 1900s. I've heard 1902 and I've heard 1898, so y'all split the difference and we'll say 1900. Now you notice it's a two-story church. That's because the upper story housed the local Masonic Lodge, and ever so briefly it was a school, a one-room schoolhouse. Now when it was a school, it only went from the 1st to the 7th grade. Boys and girls, you didn't have to go to the 8th grade. Guess where you went? To work. Dad needed the boys' help on the farm with the cattle and the crops. Mama needed the girls' help in the kitchen, cooking, cleaning, and canning. Or the boys may hop the train, go to Copperhill, and get a job in the copper mines. Now on the left, you see our friends at Hiwassee Outfitters. Just like our friends at Webb Brothers Grocery, they will rent you a raft, drive you about 5 miles upriver, and let you float gently down the Hiwassee River. Now the Hiwassee is a very gentle flowing river. The worst rapids are called Class 2 rapids, but we don't have any rapids named Grumpy like they do on the Ocoee River. I think we've got a Dopey, and that's about it. I don't know. But anyway, it's a very, very easy flowing family river. Why, you could float down in an inner tube if that's all you had. But let me warn you about the Hiwassee River's biggest issue. I don't care if it's 100 degrees outside, that water stays bad cold all year long. Man falls in the middle of summertime, he'll still come out singing soprano, I tell you. It is very cold, and the reason it's very cold is a vast majority during the summer comes from the bottom of Lake Appalachia through a great big pipe, down through 2 smaller pipes, and through that powerhouse, and never sees the light of day until he gets outside of a place called the Appalachia Powerhouse. Now our friends at Hiwassee Outfitters, they also have some cabins and the campground you just saw. And our friends at Webb Brothers, of course, they own the old Watchman's House. You can come make a very relaxed weekend here in Reliance next summer. Rafting season starts on Memorial Day weekend and goes through Labor Day weekend. You can ride the raft one day and come back and ride the good old Hiwassee River train the next. Now that we're past Reliance, we are in our eagle zone. We have seen several bald eagles this fall. They get kind of shy during the summertime with all the rafters out there. That's probably the wildest scenery we see. Everybody asks about wildlife. I say, yeah, it's the kayakers out there. But those bald eagles are back now. We've seen several this fall. So if you see one, let us shout out. Let everybody in your car know. If I find out, I will announce it on the PA system. Now, bald eagles are not native to this area. They were brought in the 1970s when they were on the endangered species list by the TWRA and all the wildlife people out west. Well, they settled them here, and they have done very, very well. They share the river with our native bird of prey called the osprey. Now, the bald eagles you'll see circling. They'll circle high above the river, and they've got good enough eyesight to see the fish. But the osprey are unique in that they can hover above the river for a few moments, looking for the fish and then dive on it. So keep a sharp eye out for our bald eagles. I bet we'll have at least 1 or 2 sightings today. Now, coming up in just a few moments on the right side is the first of our ghost towns. Now we call them ghost towns not because we've ever seen a ghost there, but because they used to be fairly big towns, and now they're all gone. Nothing's left of it. The first town we come to is the little town of Probst, Tennessee. Probst was a logging town. They had their own logging railroad, and that railroad went along the banks of Big Lost Creek. Well, they set up shop in 1906, and they did some good lumber business. Now, their sawmill was actually closer to Delano, So they would put the old logs, all those old growth logs, on flat cars and send them to the sawmill, and they cut them into finished lumber there. Their entire operation during its heyday employed almost 200 people. It was a pretty big outfit for this area of Tennessee. And they did good business for a long time, up until about 1925, when the federal government came knocking on their door and said, "Sorry, Mr. Probst, you're going to have to move. This area is becoming part of the Cherokee National Forest, and you can't cut any more trees." So right there, car number 1, look to your right. That's where the town of Probst used to be. Not there anymore. What you see is what you get. Just a little empty field by Big Lost Creek. Car number 2, we're coming into what used to be the old town of Probst. It was run by the Pendergrass Lumber Company. It's a very big industry back in the early 1900s, was logging and lumber in this region. Car number 3, you are passing through the old ghost town of Probst. Car number 4. Look to your right, that's where the town of Probst used to be. Car number 5, passing through the old town of Probst. Now, that small area is still privately owned. There's actually a cabin up on the top of the hill, but all the original buildings are long gone. And Mr. Harvey, when he started on the railroad, remembered when there was still an old house there in 1966 with the family that lived there, but it's long gone. And Probst is no more.
I apologize for the kind of cloudy view out the side here. It's because these windows are a little bit fogged over. I don't think it's from moisture so much as it is from just a haze that's built up over time on these windows. That's on the side. Front's a little bit better. It doesn't have quite as much of a haze on it like the side one does, but it does have a little bit, and it's a little bit dirty too. Not horrible, but a little bit. We are in Cherokee National Forest land here. That's where we're at, along the Hiwassee River. And the Hiwassee River is to our left right now, from the direction we're going. But right now you can't see it through the trees because it's a little bit further over. But we probably will be coming back to it here in a little bit. I'll try to get some more footage of that when we do. And like I promised, we are back at the Hiwassee River, and so I'm getting some more footage of it. Very beautiful river, and they say it's running very full today because of the Appalachian Powerhouse. They're running both of the gates through the powerhouse at this time, and it's filled the river up very full at this time. But they say that this river is very big for trout fishing. That is, whenever it's not running so full, they say that the trout fishermen like it better whenever they got it shut off and there's not much water in the middle of the river, so they can get out into the middle of the river where the fish are and be able to actually see them and catch them. And they do a lot of fly fishing here, so very beautiful.
And in Europe. And everybody in the government knew that America would probably be in that war one day, so they planned accordingly. They put this powerhouse out in the middle of nowhere for a very good reason. Their reasoning at the time was enemy spies would have a very hard time finding it and getting through America's defenses to blow it up. Well, now the reality was only very few enemy spies made it to America, and the ones that were let out by the U-boats on the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast, they didn't even get the sand out of their shoes before they were caught. We had a very good coastal defense system of both civilian and military people, and every one of them got caught, so nobody blew the powerhouse up. But just in case, they put it in this remote location to avoid being blown up and just to add extra protection. Once it was finished during the rest of the war, it was guarded by a garrison of United States Army soldiers. Now in this region, there were already two powerhouses on the Ocoee River. They were simply named Ocoee number 1 and Ocoee number 2. Then in the 1930s, late 30s, TVA built the Hiwassee Dam and Hiwassee Powerhouse further into North Carolina on the Hiwassee River. Then, in 1940, they built not one but two more powerhouses and dams. They built the Appalachia Dam and Appalachia Powerhouse, and over on the Ocoee, they built Ocoee number 3. So that gave us a total of 5 dams and powerhouses in this region. So everybody got to wondering, there ain't that many folks out here. Why are we generating so much electricity? Well, the electricity was not meant for here. You see, up the road a ways, outside the city of Knoxville, over from Knoxville, there was a little bitty town. Started out with just a few hundred residents. And then the government came in, built a massive complex in that little bitty town called Oak Ridge, Tennessee, for nuclear research. Well, nobody told us what was going on in there at the time. They had no idea it was for nuclear research. So we called it the Secret City. But that facility used a tremendous amount of electricity between Oak Ridge and the Knoxville area during the war years. They used up 10% of all electricity generated in the 48 states of America. That's a lot of juice. So what that meant was the people outside of Knoxville, in towns like Maryville, Sweetwater, all those towns outside of Knoxville, they had to get their power from somewhere else besides Knoxville, and that's why they built all these dams and powerhouses. All this power, electricity, went north. Now during the war years, when they were fully operational, it became operational in December of 1943, both the Appalachia Powerhouse and the Ocoee number 3. So that was just the nick of time for the facility in Oak Ridge. Once it opened, they needed all that power there. Besides, there were other industries around Knoxville. You had Alcoa Aluminum, very important to the war effort. And you had the Knoxville Munitions Plant, where they built bombs and mortars and such. You also had a lot of subcontractors building parts for the war effort around Knoxville, so they had to use that electricity there, and the cities around Knoxville used electricity generated around here. Now the Appalachia Powerhouse is 9 miles away from the Appalachia Dam. So to get the water from the dam to the powerhouse, they bored a huge tunnel. That tunnel is 16 feet in diameter. You just about fit this train inside of it. It's so big. And at the what they call the penstocks above us at the powerhouse, they split into two smaller pipes that are 8 feet in diameter. And we will see them when we go through the powerhouse. We actually go through the middle of the powerhouse complex. You'll see the footbridge and the powerhouse on your left, and you'll see the big water pipes on your right. Now once the powerhouse was up and running, it performed very well, generated electricity for a long time. But that powerhouse had a little bit to do with why we were able to run a tourist train up here. You see, in 2003, both the generators needed replacing. They had 2 generators in there, and that's no small task. So they had to resurrect the railroad between Etowah and the powerhouse to bring new generators in and take the old generators out. Once completed, the railroad was clear. In 2004, the Tennessee Valley Railroad teamed up with the Tennessee Overhill Association, and we ran some experimental trips, see how interested everybody was, and they were wildly popular. So many folks in this area had family that worked for L&N, and so they got to see the line that their family had worked on. And once those powerhouse trips in 2004, we finished them. In 2005, that's when they started running the iron ore out. And in 2006, since those powerhouse trips were so popular, we started our own tourist train full-time in 2006. April through November is our tourist train schedule.
Is it the last one this season?
Yeah.
So when they resurrected the tracks, they put over $2 million worth into it in 2004. Well, fast forward to 2021, and 2020 was kind of a bad year, not only because of COVID shutdown, but we had a very bad storm come through here. That same storm that had tornadoes in Chattanooga and Cleveland that did so much damage, it dumped about 5 inches of rain in about 30 minutes on these tracks. Unbelievable amount of water. Clogged up all the culverts, and we had 6 washouts and 3 landslides that covered up the tracks. So that did us in until September of 2020. We weren't able to get the track crew up here until August because we weren't running trains in Chattanooga until June. So we finally saved up enough money, sent the track crew up here, and they had us running by the middle of September in 2020. Well, a lot of that damage was done once you got past Farner. A lot of those cross ties were kind of just sitting around in water, and it speeded up the rotting process. And so in early winter of 2021, we had our regular inspection by our Federal Railway Administration, and he shut us down. There was so much damage done not only by the storm, but over time, and it was time to put more money into the tracks. So by September of 2021, we finally got enough up par to run to Farner and back, our half-day trip. And then this year, finally, we got everything fixed all the way to Copperhill. So as the song says, life is like a mountain railroad. All kind of twists and turns happen. To the generators, and the water wasn't flowing through here, and it was much lower. Right now, if you look across the tracks, you'll see a big concrete boat ramp. That boat ramp is where our rafting services, Hiwassee Outfitters and Webb Brothers, bring you up to, drop you off there, and let you float gently down the river. That normally takes about 3 to 3.5 hours just to go with the flow. Now the younger kayakers claim they can make it in 1 hour. Well, that's fine. Y'all go right ahead. I'm going to enjoy the scenery here. It is a very beautiful river, very clean river, clean water, as most of it does go through the Cherokee National Forest. Now there all across the river you see a river road,
I see it.
and in a moment you'll hear the engineer blow the horn for a road crossing by the powerhouse. TVA cut a road in off of a forestry road up on the mountain, and that way they can access the powerhouse with their big trucks for repair and maintenance.
You think that's the road y'all went on over there? River Road?
We passed the footbridge.
Y'all went past all this? That's real big one. They was going to Maggie Valley.
So here we are coming into the powerhouse complex. See the footbridge and the powerhouse on the left, and in a few moments the big pipes on the right.
He's not good.
Amanda has been a few times, but Mom was never win. Something me and Dad just done was we didn't figure Mom would like it, and she didn't figure she'd like it. And Gabby don't want to go this year, so she's like, yeah, we'll go. And but she enjoyed it. The only thing is there's not the hotels on very nice up there. But that's like,
Hi, car number 1. Look to your right and you'll see the big water pipes, 8 feet in diameter, that take the water rushing down the mountain under our tracks and into the
Come back
basement
up here
where the turbines are.
and
Car number 2,
get some more
we're
footage of
passing
this
by those
bridge in this
big
area
water
up
pipes
here
now.
sometime.
Car number 3, you're passing between the pipes and the powerhouse. Pipes on the right, powerhouse on the left. Car number 4. And car number 5 passing between the water supply pipes and the powerhouse. It gets very narrow in an area that we amazingly call the Narrows.
Yeah. Let's see.
We'll tell you all about the Narrows in just a few moments when we get there.
I wonder if this is what the river looked like. Yeah, I saw it. I wonder if this is what the river looked like before they built the powerhouse and dammed it up and all. This is very interesting. As I was saying before, if you couldn't hear me before, me and Teresa may come back up here to the Appalachian Powerhouse and go out on that footbridge and take some more footage in a later video. Now this is what the river looks like now. As he was saying, the host was saying, the river actually is lowered, much lower than what it used to be before they dammed it up. The water is called upstream, and then I take it and goes through a tunnel, pipes through the mountain, and then drops down to the powerhouse to create the power, to produce the power. And so this is what it looks like between the dam and the powerhouse.
Into the NARS right now. Well, you and I from Tennessee know what he's talking about, but a lady stopped me. She said, "Excuse me, sir, what is a NAR?" I said, "Well, that's how we pronounce the word narrows down here in southeast Tennessee." "Where are you from, ma'am?" She said, "New York." So whether you call it the Narrows or the NARS, we are there. Now you're going to see some interesting rock formations. You're going to see rocks that have been washed smooth in semicircular patterns, and you're going to see rocks with holes in the top of them. In fact, the narrowest part of the river, an area about 4 to 5 feet across, comes to 2 rocks with holes in the top, come together, and you can literally jump across the river in one jump. But as you can see through here, it wouldn't be hard to walk across, stepping from rock to rock. And there you start seeing some of those rocks with holes in them. And Mr. PW had a pretty good explanation about those holes. He said, well, what would happen is there would be a crack in the rock, and sand and dirt and small rocks would fall down in that crack, and the current would carry it around and around. Crack developed a little bit bigger into a small hole. More rocks would jump in there with it, and they'd get carried around and around. And in just a few thousand years, you'd have a big old hole wallered out in that rock. So there's your other PW word today, wallered. But now we're starting to see some of those interesting semicircular patterns. All that was done by just the force of the water coming through the river before the dam was built. In fact, across the river, you'll notice there's a smooth area to the rocks, and it comes all the way up to meet the rough area. That was the original depth of the river. So as you can see, when they blocked off the river, they cut the flow down drastically in this area. All right, car one, start looking down to your left there. You'll see the narrow spot, 2 rocks sticking out toward each other with holes in them. Car number 1. Car number 2, coming up on the 354 milepost. That means if we turned around and all the switches were aligned correctly, in 354 miles, we would be in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. That was the old headquarters for the L&N. they had what they call the 0 milepost in Louisville. So all of L&N tracks were measured out of Louisville, Kentucky. Now L&N had a big railroad. They covered a lot of area. They went as far north as Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, went as far south as New Orleans, Florida, Panhandle of Florida, all through the southeast. But right here coming up, you'll see the 3, there it goes, car 2, just past 354 milepost. That means we're 354 miles out of Louisville, Kentucky. Now ahead of us at the 355 is our second ghost town, the old ghost town of McFarland, Tennessee. Now McFarland was a railroad town. They had a big depot. They had an old railroad hotel for the crews, and they had the section houses. Now the section houses were called that because the fellers that stayed there were required to take care of a section of the track. They were responsible for the maintenance and repair of all the track between Reliance, where our bridge was, and Farner up at the top of the mountain. Now on the other side of Farner, a different section gang took care of the tracks. So all along between Marietta and Knoxville, you had all these section gangs. And there was one stayed here in McFarland. Now the big depot was a crew change point. A train would come out of Marietta, and it made this far north. It would pull into the siding. They'd tie the train down. The engineer and the steam locomotive fireman would hop out of the engine, and they'd meet the conductor and the flagman in the depot, and they'd all sign out. As soon as they'd signed out, they'd go out the back door of the depot into the railroad hotel. Now this was not a Holiday Inn Express by any means. It was pretty rudimentary. All you had in a small room was a bunk, a sink, a mirror, and a bathtub. But that's all you needed, because once you got cleaned up in your hotel room, you'd go downstairs, get a bite to eat, then take a good long nap. A few hours later, the crew caller would knock on your door, and he would wake you up, and you and your crew would take a different train back south to where you came from, either Marietta or other points south. Well, all that rocked along pretty good, especially with the AK&N when their business started improving. But then in 1906, everything changed when L&N bought the railroad. In 1908, they moved the crew change point up to their newly built town called Etowah, Tennessee. So the old railroad hotel was boarded up. L&N also changed the way they did track maintenance. Instead of having all these section gangs scattered up and down the track, they would put all their workers on work trains, and those work trains would run out of terminals like Etowah, Knoxville, Marietta, Canton, places like that. And so the old section houses were torn down. Now eventually the old railroad hotel got a little bit of use. It was resurrected around 1925 and was used as the very first ranger station for the newly formed Cherokee National Forest. But eventually the Forest Service built more permanent offices closer to civilization, and the old railroad hotel was torn down, and eventually the depot was torn down, and all we're going to see is a little clearing on the right side at the 355 milepost where the old depot used to be. Car number 2, here it comes, right there. It's a big one. Car number 3, you're passing by Treemageddon. Cars 4 and 5. There it is on the right.
Right there. Wow. Huge tree.
That was a huge tree.
Now our next point of interest will be our third and last ghost town, the old ghost town of Appalachia Station. Appalachia Station was the railroad point for the town of Appalachia. But the town of Appalachia was actually across the river. So to get from the town to the depot, you floated across the river on a ferry boat.
Very
Well, we'll tell you what happened to Appalachia and Appalachia Station when we get up there closer to them. In the meantime, we're going to tell you a little bit about the rail cars that you are riding in. If you are in car number 1, that car was built in 1946 by the American Car and Foundry near St. Louis, Missouri, and it was built for the L&N Railroad, the Louisville and Nashville. It's the L&N 3101. That never ran on this line. It ran on their prize passenger train called the Hummingbird. And the Hummingbird ran between Cincinnati, Ohio, and New Orleans, Louisiana. Car number 1 served as the L&N Hummingbird car for the entire existence of the Hummingbird train. They started in 1946, and they disbanded it in the mid-1960s. And then in 1971, it got sold to Amtrak. Amtrak used it for a few years, and eventually auctioned it off, and a railroad museum up in Kentucky bought it. And we bought it from them because we wanted a genuine L&N car on this genuine L&N line. So we restored it to its original configuration when it was on the L&N train, the Hummingbird, built in 1946 as the L&N 3101. Car number 2. Car 2 was built in 1947 by the same outfit, American Car. But it was built for a different railroad for a different purpose. It was built for the Missouri Pacific Railroad as what they called a grill car. The area which Mr. Dearman is sitting actually is a small kitchen. It has a small griddle, about a 1 foot by 1 foot diameter griddle, and 2 stove eyes that are all propane powered. The idea was they didn't want to spend all that money on a big expensive dining car because the Missouri Pacific only fixed breakfast or lunches on some of their trains. So they bought this grill car. Car number 2 was a grill car, as they called it. It was the Missouri Pacific 873. Now eventually they started phasing out, cutting back on it. It was also built in 1946, just like Car 1. And it was built for the Central of Georgia by American Car. It was the Central of Georgia 662. Now car number 3 ran on their prize passenger train called the Nancy Hanks 2. Now if you were a Central Georgia man, you had to add that 2 because you see the Nancy Hanks 1 was a pre-war steam-powered train. But after World War II was over, America was doing great, and so all the railroads went out and bought brand new streamlined diesels. Central Georgia was no different than any other railroad, and they ran that car on the Nancy Hanks 2 between Atlanta, Georgia and Savannah, Georgia. Now they advertised it in the 40s and 50s as your Florida connection, because once you hopped off the train in Savannah, Georgia, you could hop on a Seaboard Airline or an Atlantic Coastline train that would take you on into Florida. Further down in Florida, you'd hop off their train and onto a Florida East Coast train, and you could ride all the way to Miami. So back in the day, it was possible to ride from Atlanta, Georgia to Miami, Florida with 2 connections, all on rails. Can't do that now. Amtrak doesn't serve the, there's still plenty of trains that go up and down the East Coast from Miami northward, but none of them connect with Atlanta. The only Amtrak trains in Atlanta go either up to Washington, D.C. or down south to New Orleans. So car number 3, once it served to the Central of Georgia, after Southern took over the Central of Georgia, they used it for several years. But instead of selling it to Amtrak, they donated it in the 1970s to the Railroad Museum near Atlanta, Georgia, called the Southeastern Railway Museum. And they technically own that car, so we leased that car from them. Now our friends at Atlanta Southeastern Railway Museum have a great collection of static displays, and they have a nice little short trip. I believe they have some caboose trips and so forth. It's a pretty good museum. We invite you to go visit them. But they don't have any long trips like we do. So one of their ways of making money for their museum is to rent equipment to museums like us at TDRM. In fact, the car number 3 is not the only thing we lease from them. We also lease a locomotive that we use in Chattanooga from time to time from our friends at Southeastern Railroad Museum. So car number 3 belongs to them, but they rent it to us. Built in 1946, part of the Central of Georgia Nancy Hanks 2 train.
Yep. Works like a deer.
Car number 4 was built in 1955 by the Budd Rail Car Company out of Philadelphia. It was built for the Great Northern Railroad. It was originally the Great Northern, 1331, and they ran it on their train that went across the Continental Divide on the northern end of the American Rocky Mountains. Now they added a dome to it. We use that dome as our first class seating. When you're up in that dome, you get a beautiful bird's eye view of all the mountain and river scenery, and you also get free snacks on the first class ticket, as well as a host or hostess to take care of you during the trip. Now, car number 4 served the Great Northern for many years, and like a lot of other railroads, they sold it to Amtrak in 1971, and Amtrak ran it and changed the number to 9410. Amtrak auctioned it off, and a rail car dealer up near St. Louis bought it, and we bought it from him several years ago to run as our first class car, as well as downstairs coach seats. So car number 4, built in 1955 by the Budd Rail Car Company, originally as the Great Northern 1331. Now it's the Tennessee Valley 9410. All right, car number 5. Car number 5 was built for the Canadian Pacific Railroad. We're one of 18 cars built, and it has a number, but we call it by its name. It's so special, it's got a name. Its name is the Algonquin Park. Now, Canadian Pacific named all of that series of cars the Park Series, and they were all named after large provincial parks throughout the country of Canada. The Algonquin Park was named for the Algonquin Indian tribe, native to that area, and it's, I believe, north of Toronto. And it has a lot of things inside of the park. It has a big mural that is a painting of the park, and it has a etching, a vinyl carving of things that were native, or things that were common to the Algonquin Indian tribe. But that car is our first class car. It has a dome for first class, bird's eye viewing, but the back of the car is tapered off. It's rounded off and has windows all the way around the back of the car. And that's what we call our observation area. Back there you get a beautiful panoramic view of all the riverside and trackside scenery. Now, how in the world did a car come from Canada down to Tennessee? Well, I'm glad you asked. That car is privately owned. The gentleman that owns it happened to be sitting right next to me. He'd get mad if I didn't mention him. He bought that car and used it on a similar railroad museum called the Blue Water Railroad Museum. And they didn't have their own tracks, but they ran on a short line railroad. Well, short lines are good for tourist operations because most short lines only run Monday through Friday and have the weekends off. So they ran their train on the weekends. Well, that worked out well for them. They had lots of nice trains, and it worked out well. They would pay the company they owned the short line. But then that short line got bought out, and the new owners told them, sorry folks, no more passenger trains. They didn't want to pay that liability insurance. You have to carry millions of dollars worth of insurance to run passenger trains. So there he was, had that car and nowhere to run it. Now, being part of the Blue Water Railroad Museum, our bosses went up to Michigan and we bought 2 cars from them. We bought a dining car that we use on our dinner train, and we bought a passenger coach that we use on our local, or sometimes when they come back, our Georgia trips. And just for good measure, they felt so sorry for us, they gave us a free train car. It's what we call a basket case. It didn't even have any seats inside of it. But we wanted that car because it was originally a Southern car, a Southern streamlined car. And it's currently undergoing renovation now in our shops in Chattanooga. So while our bosses were up there, they met the fellow that owned car number 5. And they made him an offer he couldn't refuse, said, look, we're going to pay you all this money if you'll rent us that car. and send it to us. So he sent that car all the way from Lansing, Michigan, Hiwassee, Michigan, down to Etowah, Tennessee. And our friends at CSX brought it out to us about 10 years ago, I believe. So 10 or 12 years ago. It's been a long time. So we are glad to have that car because it is our first class car along with the dome of car 4. But very interesting history on all these cars. So that's the history of the cars you're riding in today. We should be coming into Appalachia Station in just a few moments. Now they actually had 2 depots here, a passenger depot and a freight depot. Now I would never want to call L&N. I love the L&N. I would never want to call them a cheap outfit, but their idea of a freight depot was pretty darn frugal. All it was a wooden boxcar with the wheels taken off, set up on pilings, and they took a saw and cut one door in and one window in and said, all right, fellas, there's your freight depot, put your desk over here in the corner. And that's all it was. In fact, most of the freight depots along this line were those old box cars, and they were pretty sturdy. In fact, one even exists today back in Reliance. The Webb family we talked about, they bought the old depot, drug it across the river on a wagon, and put it next to their barn, and they're still using it for storage to this very day. I think it's on about its 3rd roof, but still, they use it for storage. But Appalachia Station was the railroad point for the town of Appalachia across the river. Everything worked fine until 1942, and the level of the river lowered so far they could not float the boat across. The ferry boat would not make the trip. So everybody moved out of Appalachia. Now Appalachia Station stayed up and running because all the trains had to stop here. If it was a steam locomotive powered train, by L&N rules, you had to stop and take on water. Now I want to give you a little principle of steam locomotives. When they're on flat land, oh, they work perfectly. When they start going up the mountain, there's the possibility of an air pocket forming in the front top part of your boiler, and if that happens, the boiler will go boom. So every fireman in that locomotive knew he had to keep a full boiler, so he always topped off with water back there at Appalachia Station. Now if the passenger train stopped and took on water, all the passengers would get out. There was a little store back here, several houses, and that water tank. There was also a short side track that a steam locomotive, a separate steam locomotive stayed on, called the pusher locomotive. His job was to couple up to the back of the freight trains and help push them up the mountain. Well, all that rocked along real good until they swapped to diesel power and they quit stopping. So when the trains didn't stop anymore, everybody moved out of Appalachia Station. But eventually they built that road across the river. The road on the other side was called Tellico Road, went to Tellico Plains. And here we go over the bridge of Highway 68. And the other way, it was called Copperhill Road. Highway 68 starts at the Georgia state line in Copperhill and goes almost all the way in a northwesterly direction through the state of Tennessee. It goes through Tellico Plains, goes through a little community called Coker Creek. Then it goes through Madisonville, goes under US 411, I believe, in Madisonville. Then it goes, crosses US 11 in Sweetwater, and goes on to Spring City, Tennessee. There in Spring City, it merges with US 27 north, goes north several miles, then splits off of 27 and winds its way up the Cumberland Plateau and goes right through the middle of downtown Crossville, Tennessee. Once you get out of Crossville, it merges with a different highway that'll take you on up to Kentucky. But now that we've passed over Highway 68, we are starting our climb up Bald Mountain.
Here we go.
Now, the reason they call it Bald Mountain is not because the fellow that found it didn't have any hair, but because as soon as the Cherokee Nation was removed from this area, they cut all the trees off just one spot. They made a bald spot. The reason they just cut it off that one spot is that was the spot right over the river. When they harvested those trees, there was no railroad up here. There wasn't even a good path, so the only way to get those trees out was to float them down the Hiwassee River to Appalachia. They pulled them out and they sent them to the sawmill there in Tellico Plains. So it's entirely possible that a lot of the older buildings there in Tellico, original buildings, were used wood harvested off of Bald Mountain. So they made that big bald spot. They cleared every bit of it out. And it stayed cleared. Some brush did start growing up, some trees start growing up. But then the railroad came through with the loop. And when they ran the loop through the bald spot, they made things a little steeper. They had to carve out the shelf and they made the mountain a little bit steeper, and they started having a problem with erosion. But you know as well as I do, for every problem we have here in America, the government's got an answer.
Oh, yeah.
In the 1920s, the federal government came to the American South and said, "Oh my gosh, y'all got a terrible problem with erosion. Oh, I know, here, plant this little plant. It will solve all of your problems." And the name of that little plant was kudzu.
Kudzu, yep.
Kudzu's from Asia. It was used to growing in volcanic-based dirt. Once it hit the fertile dirt of the American South, plus it loves heat and humidity, it took off. Our track director assures me it grows about 3 or 4 inches a day sometimes in the middle of the summer up here on the mountain. I talked to a family that lived in the Mississippi Delta down in Louisiana. It grows 1 foot a day in the Mississippi Delta. Thank you, government. But the good thing about that kudzu is it preserved that bald spot. So as we climb up this mountain, when we get to that bald spot, we're going to get a beautiful view across what we call the Hiwassee Gorge. Now we climb the whole time. From back there at Appalachia, we climb. And the steepest part is about a 2% grade, but it averages about 1 to 1.5% through most of the loop. So it's a pretty stout climb all the way up through the loop. Now this is the mountain, the first time they came through with the switchbacks. You literally had to zigzag back and forth up the mountain. You know, if you drive a big mountain road up in the mountains, you have to take hairpin turns from time to time. Trains don't do that. Train would pass a switch and they'd have to go backwards up the next leg of the switchback. They'd pass another switch, go forward for a little bit, pass another switch, go backward again, and finally the last switch would put them out on the main line. Now, the problem with the tail tracks were there was one tail track that was so short they could only bring 4 freight cars up at a time with their steam locomotive. So back in the 1890s, the average train was about 30, maybe 40 cars long. Well, just for mathematics' sake, let's say we had a 40-car train. That means bringing 4 cars up at a time, we had to go up that mountain 10 times. Don't forget, you got to come back down the mountain 10 times. But hold on. Twice a day, you had to get out of the way completely because here came the passenger train. The passenger train had track rights over you. You better be out of its way because he's coming on. Well, the first passenger train was the southbound from Knoxville to Marietta. As soon as he cleared, you could get a little work done, but then about an hour later, here comes the northbound from Marietta up toward Knoxville. Good, now he's out of the way, we can get to work, right? No, now you got another freight train that was behind that passenger train. He's trying to zigzag his way down the mountain. So it became a terrible bottleneck, and it delayed the train significantly enough to where the shippers started shipping back through Chattanooga to get their freight to Atlanta. So the first 2 railroads went bankrupt. But the next bunch, they had a different plan. They wanted to build around the mountain. Well, when they got to figuring out, they realized it was going to take time to build 2 very expensive bridges across the Hiwassee River. So, not dealing with mountain railroading very much, the new guys, they called on their friends with L&N. They said, "Hey, would you mind sending that fella that built all your mountain railroads out here? Show us how to build one here, tell us what we need." And they sent their best man. His name was Thomas Abers. He came from Louisville, Kentucky out here, stopped around this mountain for 2 days and presented his plan to him, said, "Fellas, what y'all need are loops." He originally had designed 2 complete separate loops up the mountain. and that resulted in only a 1% grade. Well, the railroad was brand new, didn't have a lot of cash, so they decided on one loop up the mountain, and that resulted in a little steeper of a grade, a 2% grade. So they started work on the loop and finished it in early 1897, and it was a success. It made trains much easier to get up and down the mountain. Now they started putting that pusher back there, and that helped out a lot. That pusher locomotive would couple up to the back of the freight trains. He'd lace in his air hose, air lines, and he'd do a quick brake check. And then through a series of whistle signals, the engineers would talk to each other. No radios back then. So when the engineer on the back locomotive was ready to go, he'd blow his whistle 2 times. That meant forward. Well, the engineer on the front heard it. He'd blow his 2 times, and together they'd tug on the throttle, and they'd both come up the mountain, one pulling and one pushing those heavy freight trains. Now, if by chance the pusher locomotive was not there or not on duty, a train might have to double the mountain. That means he leaves half his train back there at Appalachia Station and brings first half up, then only has to go back down through the loop one more time to get the rest of his train. So all in all, it was still a better deal than the old switchbacks. Well, once L&N bought the railroad, they realized mountain railroading is not conducive with making big money. So, around 1908, they went farther north, out of Atlanta, to Cartersville, Georgia, and they took a right turn out of Cartersville, Georgia, and they built what they call the New Line. They finished the New Line in 1910. We still call it the New Line. Things don't change quick on the railroad, let me tell you. Now, that gave this the nickname of the Old Line. Now, the nickname for this route was the Hook and Eye route. What you are riding through right now was what they called the eye, like the eye of a needle. The hook was down in Tate, Georgia, where they had a very sharp, almost 90-degree turn around some of the marble mines. Well, they have since straightened that hook up. It's not near as sharp a turn, but they had a 5-mile-an-hour speed restriction on that hook and always had a 10-mile-an-hour speed restriction here in the loop. Now, loops used to be a popular way to get railroads up mountains. However, in the mid-1900s, tunneling technology became a lot better and a lot easier. So they started making more tunnels. And right now, there's only 4 loops left in America. You are in one of 4 right now. We call this the Bald Mountain Loop or Hiwassee Loop. Now, if you go out to Colorado, there's a very neat loop out there called the the Golden Colorado. Somewhere out there, they have a little tourist train on their loop. They use steam locomotives on theirs. And out in California, you got 2 very busy loops. The Tehachapi Loop, built by Santa Fe Railroad, and the Williams Loop, built by the Western Pacific. All right, here we are coming into the bald spot. As you can see, the trees are thinning out, and the kudzu has taken over. So we're going to pass one big tree and have an open spot, open view, all the way across the Hiwassee Gorge here in just a moment. If I get your cameras ready, get to a window. Car number 1, you should just about be there and listen. There we go, our conductor up front. Clear view of car number 1. All right, car number 2. We're going to pass that last big tree right by the tracks. Right there. And here comes your beautiful view across the river there. That was spectacular about a month ago with all the leaves. They behaved very well this year. All right, car number 3. As you can see, the river's a lot further down than what it was. Enjoy that view from car 3 on the left there. All right, car number 4, you're turning the loop. Enjoy that beautiful view across the gorge while the rest of us stare at kudzu. Car number 5 coming through the bald spot of Bald Mountain, Tennessee. Now then, next we're going to go underneath a great big wooden trestle. Well, that trestle is what ties the loop together. First we go underneath it, and then we loop around the top of the tracks, and we go on top of the very same trestle. Now, if we were a freight train with 68 cars or more, we would actually loop over ourselves. And I had that opportunity several years ago. I was conductor on what we called a hopper train. Back in the day, we would store coal hoppers for TVA. See, as TVA started phasing out some of their coal plants that they converted to natural gas, they wound up with a few hundred extra coal hoppers. And we happened to have a few hundred extra feet of track in our yard at Copperhill, so we stored them for them. So when me and the engineer were on top of this trestle, we looked down, and there was our own train going right beneath us, right at this trestle right here. So here we go underneath the loop trestle. All right, everybody in the dome's duck. Haven't made it last weekend. We ought to make it this weekend. So
Here
the
we
loop
come.
trestle
Here's the
is
trestle.
what ties the loop together. Now in a
Right
few
there.
minutes, we're going to be on top of that very
There it
same
is.
trestle.
Yep. Going through it. Going through it now. And we're climbing. You can see how steep the train is getting on up ahead of us. Going around Ball Mountain. And we just keep going to the right. Unlike in NASCAR racing where everything goes left. We'll be going right.
All right, if you're on the left side and you look down a little bit, you're going to see a set of railroad tracks. Now you'll see them a little bit better as we progress. Now Mr. Harvey told me what they would do with the new kids. They called them cubs. Either cub trainmen, cub flagmen, brakemen. Those cubs would look out for the first time on this loop, and they look down there and goes, wait a minute, whose railroad is that down there? And they would look at him and go, don't you know anything? That's where Southern Railway comes through, dummy. It ain't. That's where you were about 5 minutes ago. Because as we loop around the mountain, we spiral up the mountain, and the tracks parallel each other for about a quarter mile. So the next time we go through the bald spot, you'll be able to look straight down and see the tracks you were on the first time you came through it. And that'll happen in just a few moments. But it's always neat. Same deal applies for a long train. That 82-car hopper train, as the locomotives were here, the end of the train was down there. That's very neat to see your own train like that.
They actually have a video of that on YouTube.
But
And
TVA
then
has
got a
either
very
scrapped or
review
sold
of it
off the
from
extra
a
coal hoppers.
drone that someone
We
flew.
don't have a lot of
So
storage. If you know anybody
you
that
can
has a
look
lot
that
of
up
train
on
cars that
YouTube
need
if you want
storage,
to.
we got a great track. Got a great yard for it. We'll only charge, I don't know, $3 a day. How about that? All right, so now as you can see, the kudzu is taking over once again. And here we go, our second pass. Car 1, look out across that river and look straight down. You'll see the tracks you were on the first time.
And we'll look over here and look down.
Car number 2, here comes our
Sorry, I
turn.
keep banging the camera up against the window over here.
All right,
Don't
straight
realize it's
down.
so as it closes.
That's where you were a few minutes
there
ago.
it is. You can
And
see it
enjoy
down
that
there.
view
There's-
across the
there's-
river.
Can you see?
Car number 3, your turn in the ball spot right now.
Yep. And we were just down there. Now we're probably going to be coming around to the trestle itself, being on the trestle. And we are still climbing. You can see the angle of the cars as we come around.
All right, you remember that trestle we went underneath a little bit ago?
Yeah.
Well, now we're about to go on top of that trestle. Now it doesn't matter what side you're sitting on, left or right. You can look out your window here on either side and look down and see the tracks below. So car number 1, you're on top of the loop trestle right now. Look left or look right, doesn't matter. Car number 2, here's our turn. On top of the loop trestle. Car number 3,
Here we go.
on top of the trestle. Look out and look down. Car number 4, you're on top of the loop trestle.
Oh, wow.
Got either side there to the tracks below. And car number 5,
There's the tracks.
your turn on top of the loop trestle. Look out left windows or right windows. That's where we were a few minutes ago, underneath the loop trestle.
Yep, there it was.
The Appalachia Powerhouse. And if you look at the dam real carefully, look to the far right. In the shadows, you'll see a big gray pipe. That is that 16-foot diameter pipe that brings the water off the bottom of Lake Appalachia into the tunnel. The tunnel actually goes under our tracks, and the length of the tunnel is 8.6 miles. So just about 9 miles between the dam and the powerhouse. Now the dam and the lake are actually in North Carolina. So the state line's about halfway between here and there. So right there is where the Hiwassee River comes into the state of Tennessee. As you can see, there's no cities around there. It's a very clean river coming out of the mountains of North Carolina and stays that way all the way to the Tennessee River. Now y'all rode a good time. You can see that old pipe pretty good on that right side because all the leaves are off the trees. Now then, that was a huge project. They had so many raw materials coming in for the building of the dam, the powerhouse, the pipeway. They had to build their own railroad yard. And right ahead of us up here, we're going to see that rail yard. It's called Farner Yard. But now when TVA started planning for the project, they started hiring folks in the end of 1939. In this region of America, they were still under the grips of the Great Depression in a lot of places. So if you could get a job, you were doing pretty good. But if you could get a job with TVA, you were doing even better. They paid well for the time being, and they also provided very nice housing for you. The place you stayed while you were building the dam was a very nice wooden floor, wooden side tent, a big canvas tent. But during the winter, they gave you a nice little coal stove to keep warm in. So they did pretty good when they first started. But then something happened in December of 1941. America entered the war. Hey, this is Tennessee. We are the volunteer state. They lost almost 70% of their workforce to the war, the military. These fellas didn't wait to get drafted. They went and joined. So they had to hire some more people. Well, they had a magic list from the draft board called 4F. Now these guys were guys that had maybe vision problems or hearing problems. They weren't going to be drafted, but they could still work. So they went all through this region, hired those guys, found some older guys, brought them out of retirement, found some younger guys, brought them out of school, and they still finished the project only 2 months behind. Originally supposed to be finished in October of 43. It was fully operational in December of 43. Now you look over here, that's where the old rail yard was. So if they needed something at the dam, they offloaded it and drove down that road. Well, after the war, they paved that road all the way up to Highway 68. So what do you think we named that road that goes down to the dam? You darn right it's the damn road. It says so right up there at 68. Now,
See, I told you.
Correctly, this is a family show. Now you saw where the gate was closed. TVA used to leave that gate open in the spring, summer, and fall. You could drive down there, drive under that huge pipe.
Yeah.
Until one day some nut decided it would be funny to shoot a hole in that pipe. Well, TVA promptly patched the hole and locked that gate. I don't know about you, but I ain't going through a locked gate that says TVA on it. All right, we're coming into the little community of Farner, Tennessee. This is kind of our halfway point. This is where we get out of the mountain railroading and into the nice rolling hillsides and mountain views of southeast Tennessee. Now, Farner is our halfway point for our short trip that we'll do tomorrow. But today, you're going to keep sailing right on through Farner. Don't blink, you might miss it. The one thing, the Farner used to have a fairly big pasture depot, and it was used extensively because there was a small college here in Farner, small private college. And the vast majority of the students got here by railroad. But in the mid-1950s, L&N discontinued the passenger train on this line, so they didn't have any more. Now the depot stayed active. Mr. Harvey can remember the station agent here. Even knows where he lives down the tracks there. But eventually they tore the depot down, and all that's left is the old Farner depot sign that we're going to see on a gentleman's house up here. When they tore the depot down, his father or grandfather obtained the sign, and we started our passenger trips in '06. He nailed it up the side of his house. Let everybody know you're in beautiful downtown Farner, Tennessee.
Maybe it's this road over here. There's a road. You can see it. Out over here. There's the town of Farner. Like he said, don't blink or you'll miss it.
All right, so from this point on down toward Copperhill, we're going to forego any more narration. Ain't a whole lot to see except the beautiful farmlands and faraway mountains here. But we'll talk to you again as we get closer to Copperhill, and we'll talk about our stop in Copperhill, talk about some of the restaurants, some of the stores there in town that you can visit. In the meantime, enjoy the beautiful views of the southeast Tennessee's rolling hills and mountain vistas. Thank you very much.
You can definitely tell that we have topped the mountain and are coming down, because as you can tell from the tops of the cars in front of us, we are at a decline, going downhill from this point up. And of course, I'm sure we'll bottom out and level off before we get into Copperhill. But anyway, we're coming down through here, and I'm sure, like I told Teresa, they had to give it a lot of power coming up the mountain, coming over Ball Mountain and the Loop. But now they're probably having to hold the brakes on to keep us slowed down coming down the mountain. Not much to see out here. Like you said, rolling hills and all. Pretty much it. Just rolling right along with some residents over here on our left. Looking out the window, if you can see it. There's must be a lot of crossings, because like I was telling Teresa, the engineer's blowing the horn an awful lot. And we've gone over several in the last few minutes. But just like the host was saying, got mostly just rolling hills and pastures down here. Yeah. At least on this side anyway. If you can see for that sun is very bright over here. Well, as you can tell, the fog has burned off. We got partially blue skies. I think it's probably warming up, because it feels pretty good in here right now. I don't know what it feels like outside, but we're probably not too far from Copperhill, and we're both getting pretty hungry, so hopefully we'll be there soon. I'm trying to decide where to eat. They gave us a list of the restaurants and addresses of where they're at, and even a menu of what restaurants have. So we'll be stopping here shortly and getting some food. We are now in Copperhill, Tennessee. We made it into town a little while ago, and we just got through lunch here at a place called Kenny's Pizza and Subs, and we just had a meal in there. Really good meal. In fact, it's so good that the train workers actually come over from the train we were on and ate in there themselves. They knew about this place and eat in there quite often, so it must be pretty good because they go in there and eat too, the whole crew of them. But yeah, we made it over here. We're actually just over the state line in McCaysville, Georgia, and we're now just going to mosey around here, around town for a little bit and see what kind of shops my wife can find to spend money in, and just kind of tour around for a little bit because we still got about an hour before the train departs to go back up into Tennessee. So come along and join us if you will. By the way, this is the Masonic Lodge here in McCaysville, and it's just barely inside the Georgia line. Masonic Temple, I don't know what number it is, but it's right there on the corner of that building. Thought that was an interesting since I'm a Mason myself. We're now at the Georgia-Tennessee line, and it literally dissects this intersection from right here, as you can see right at the corner of that building, that blue line that goes right across right here, right over towards that IGA right there, just on the other side. This is on the left side of that line is Tennessee, and we're actually standing in Georgia over here. Now, I'm from this area. I know this area very well. It's not that big of a deal to me, but it is something that is a tourist attraction. A lot of people have stand there and have their picture taken with them straddling the line. We just stepped into a shop over here where we found some kudzu blossom jelly. They were telling us about that on the train on the way down here, and they say it's really good, very unusual, never heard of it myself, but people must really like it because we just stopped at another shop to see if they actually had it, and they didn't, unfortunately. So we walked on down the street and found this other shop that had it here. They actually have the small jars of it and the larger jars of it. Teresa got one of them. Plus they also have some sort of perfume that she had actually got made of kudzu blossom as well. And here in this same shop, we've got the Georgia-Tennessee line that cuts right through the middle of it. Goes right through here. So right now we are standing in Tennessee, as you can see by the Tennessee line or plate. Can't talk. Now we are standing in Georgia, Fannin County, Georgia. Well, we're coming back to the train now, standing across the street from it, fixing to board. The train will be pulling out of here around 2:30, and this is a better shot of the train from this morning because it was so foggy this morning you couldn't hardly see anything. So thought I'd get out here and get another shot of the train on the outside before we started getting in and making our way back up to the dome car that we were in, which is on the very front. You can't hardly see it from here. I'll get another shot of it here. And there's the dome car, and it's way up there towards the front. It's the second one up, not that orange one, but that one next to it. We're now back in the car, the dome car that we rode up in, and this is what it looks like from the inside. I never did get any pictures of it from the inside, so we're actually sitting in the back. We were sitting across the aisle and facing the other way, so we were right on the very front of it coming up. Now we're at the very back of it, facing back the other way, but we're on the front end of the train this time. But this is what it looks like. We are now departing Copperhill, Tennessee. We are pulling out of well, I wouldn't say the station, but the platform where we disembarked and re-embarked at, and heading out of town.
So those people that are sitting over there, they're cool. Because those also have not only tap, but they also have IR.
There, left to right to the tracks below. Car number 3, you're on top of the loop trestle right now. Look out either side there, left to right. And car number 2, here comes our turn.
We are now looking out there.
All right, here we go underneath
And
the loop
looking at the
trestle.
loop
Right
trestle right
about
here.
now, locomotive's going underneath it.
Yep, right there.
So there's car 5 going underneath the loop trestle now. That was a little song called Dueling Banjos, and it was featured on this rather unfortunate movie in the 1970s called Deliverance. Do not worry, Deliverance was not filmed on the Hiwassee River. Those were not Tennessee boys giving Ned Beatty all his memories there. We didn't like the movie much, but we did like that song. That song got very popular. One of the songs got me interested in playing bluegrass. Heard a lot of good bluegrass back then. That song actually made the top 10 to American Top 40 in I think 1972, and I can remember as a young teenager hearing it on the popular radio stations. Why, you could hear rock and roll, you could hear bluegrass, you could hear Motown, country rock, disco. Well, 4 out of 5 ain't bad. But not only did I hear got a lot of good bluegrass on the radio, I also heard some pretty good bluegrass on television. My favorite television programs, y'all probably remember good old Grandpa Jones, that old claw hammer banjo on. Yee-haw! Old Roy Clark. Roy Clark could play every bluegrass instrument and play it better than most. Absolutely, unbelievably talented feller. There was another show had good bluegrass on it. Andy Griffin, when them Darling boys would come down there. Paul Darling, his empty whiskey jug, them 4 boys, and his daughter Charlene. Daddy, don't play that, it makes me cry. Them Darlings were some pretty darn good pickers. That's because in real life they were called the Dillards, and they were one of the best bluegrass groups in America at the time. Then there was another good show with bluegrass on it. Now this show, I'm going to play a few notes from the first part of this show's theme song. And I'll bet if you remember that show and that song, you probably remember all the words to it. So help me sing along when I start singing, if you remember this one right here now. There's one day he was shooting at some food up through the ground coming by balloon crew. Oil that is. Black gold.
Texas tea.
Well, the first
Thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire. Them folks said, Jed, move away from there. And California says, what you ought to be. And they loaded up the drug and they built to Beverly Hillside is. When swimming pools, movie stars.
Ellie Mae. Y'all come back now, you That was, of course, the theme to the Beverly Hillbillies, and it was first sung for that show by bluegrass greats Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. Now, we got a local connection to old Lester and Earl. When they first split from Bill Monroe, made their own band, their stand-up bass player was a fellow named Cousin Jake. And Cousin Jake Tulloch was from Etowah, Tennessee. So a lot of folks grew up knowing Cousin Jake was famous, but they thought those guys with him were just a bunch of drums. They didn't know. But Cousin Jake was a founding member of the original Lester and Earl bunch. And he was from Etowah, so in his memory, every March, about the second or third weekend, we have the Cousin Jake Bluegrass Festival here in Etowah. So if you like good bluegrass, that's a great place to come hear some. The neatest part is Saturday during the day, all the old timers gather at the old depot there in Etowah, and they jam with the youngins, learning bluegrass. And it is a very neat experience just to hear those folks jam together, because bluegrass, it is not generational. Everybody plays the same type of bluegrass. All right, so I bought my first banjo at 14. Learned up a few songs, and my dad said, hey, pack that banjo up. We're going down to your grandmama and granddaddy's next weekend. I want you to play it for them. They might like that kind of music. Well, when I did, I found my biggest fan. My grandmama loved all those old bluegrass, specifically those old bluegrass gospel tunes. Well, she made a list of all the songs. I learned them up. We'd sit on the front porch of the old family home place. She just sang and sang. This next song was her favorite of them all. A little song called I'll Fly Away. Let me make sure this thing's in tune for grandmother. My G string keeps coming apart. There we go. Alright, y'all remember to help me sing, because as we're going north, my voice is going south here. One glad morning,
When this life is over, I'll fly away to the land of our celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by. I'll fly away.
I'll fly away. How about one more?
Yeah.
All right.
How about
This
two
next
more?
song I kind of learned later in life. You see, I grew up around the big metropolis of Atlanta, Georgia. But in the fall of 2001, I had all I could stand of Atlanta traffic, and I had to get out of there. We moved up near Chattanooga. Not only did I get stuck in that traffic, y'all understand, not only did I get stuck in it like everybody else, I had to work in it. I'm a retired firefighter from Cobb County, Georgia. So if there was ever a bad wreck on I-75 north of Kennesaw, Georgia, that was us, good old Engine 11. We'd wave the Channel 2 news chopper on the way by. Well, I had to get out of there. That place was driving me nuts. We moved up there to Chattanooga, very nice little town called Cleveland, Tennessee. Once we settled in Cleveland, we found the church home we liked. We joined that church, and the day we joined, one of the deacons drew me aside. He said, "Fella, I heard something bad about you. We got to talk." He drew me aside. I said, "Sir, what did you hear bad about?" He said, "Well, I heard you moved here from Georgia." Now, the whole time he's talking to me, he dresses a little different than the average churchgoer. On Sunday mornings, he wears a very nice orange jacket. He has an orange and white checkered silk tie. And he's even got little orange cufflinks with a little white T. He said, "Fella, I heard you moved here from Georgia, but I heard you play the banjo. That's all right up here." I said, "Sir, what are we getting at here?" He said, "Look, I just want to make sure you know about the law of bluegrass in Tennessee. I said, sir, I've never heard of such a thing. He said, oh, there is something along. Let me tell you that right now, young man. That law clearly states that if you move into the great state of Tennessee, any other state in this country, and you play any of the bluegrass instruments, then fella, you got 30 days to learn a brand new song.
Yeah.
What song do you think he's talking about?
Rocky Top.
I was born and raised on Rocky Top, up in the Tennessee. Ain't no smoke on Rocky Top, ain't no cell phone bills. Once I had a girl on Rocky Top, after the other half cat. While it was me when she was so hot, I still dream about that. Rocky Top will always be home sweet home to me. Good old Rocky Top, Rocky Top, Tennessee, Rocky Top, Tennessee. Ladies and gentlemen, it was miraculous up here. About a month ago, God was so happy that Tennessee beat Alabama, he turned every leaf orange. There's no red leaves out here. Y'all enjoy your trip. Well, that wraps up our trip from Delano, Tennessee, down to Copperhill, Tennessee, over the famous Hiwassee Loop on our excursion, the Copperhill Express. And we're going to end the video here. I know I didn't get much footage from the train on the way back, but most of that footage we'd already seen, and we was already on the optimum side of the train to actually get a lot of that because of the fact that we were on the river a good portion of the time going down. They made us swap places, swap sides on the way back, but we'd already seen most of the points of interest. Some of the points of interest that we did see that we didn't get filmed, we're probably going to come back and film those on another little excursion up here ourselves anyway. So with that said, we're going to bring this video to a close. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We hope you enjoyed coming along with us on the high iron from Delano to Copperhill, Tennessee on the Copperhill Special. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more similar content. And don't forget to hit that notification bell at the top to be notified when we upload new videos. You can keep up with us on our Facebook and Instagram pages. We'll leave links to those sites in the description below. Also, if you really like our content, please consider donating a few bucks a month through our Patreon page to help us out with travel expenses. I'll leave a link to that side in the description below as well. Again, thanks so much for watching. God bless, and we'll see you in our next video.